Death comes unexpectedly.
It's one of my favourite scenes from the 1960 film Pollyanna, where the pastor launches into a hellfire and brimstone sermon that sets the chandeliers rattling. Of course, Pollyanna changes his perspective and helps him to have a bit more of a positive view of life in the end, but nevertheless, he does make a point. Death does come unexpectedly. It's something we usually avoid thinking about until we're forced to confront its reality, often at the bedside of someone we love. Yvonne Hippolyte is a counsellor and a chaplain at the Sydney Adventist Hospital. While the rest of us are running the other way, she chooses to engage with situations of death and dying every time she steps through the door of her workplace. And my question is, why would anyone want to do that?
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
What do you find valuable about working in that sort of environment where people are sick and sometimes, don't make it out?
Well, it's not everybody that doesn't make it out. The majority of people do make it out.
Well, that's right. And praise God for that.
Yes, indeed. I'm so used to working in a hospital setting. Mm-hmm. My background is cardiac physiology. And so working in the capacity of as a chaplain is not an unusual role for me, taking care of the sick.
Mm-hmm. For you, and this is something I've noticed visiting hospitals, for a lot of the staff, this is just day-to-day work. This is 9 to 5. Whenever I'm in a hospital, particularly if it's me or my family who needs to be there, it's a big deal. This is often a major thing in my life, something I'll remember for a long time after that. Do you find that when you are meeting with people in hospitals that there's a lot of emotion there? I mean, is this why we need chaplains in hospitals? Because these are often life-changing events?
So the role of a chaplain is not just for the patient, it's also for the staff and also for relatives who attend the hospital to visit their sick relatives from time to time. And our role as support workers, our role is there to be a presence. When people are finding it difficult to enter an unfamiliar setting, an unfamiliar environment, and also one where they're just not sure what they're going to find. They're not sure how their relative or friend is going to present themselves at that time. And it also means that they're often dealing with things in their own personal lives, which makes it difficult for them to face what the person who they're visiting is going through.
Yeah, people have, fears of heights, fears of spiders, fears of, public speaking, but they say the fear of the unknown is sometimes the greatest. And I guess that's the scary thing about hospital, isn't it? That you go in there and you don't necessarily know which way it's going to go, what the diagnosis is going to be, what the prognosis is. Is that part of the scariness of a hospital for a patient and their family?
That is part of the journey. We usually say that when patients enter a hospital, they're entering on a journey. Now, that journey can be short or it can be long. And that journey can be a difficult one or it can be an enjoyable one. It's not all part of chaplaincy work. That's all doom and gloom.
Well, that's
we
right.
are there
you go into hospital to get better, to get healed, and sometimes
to have babies, to receive good news in some cases. And so we're there as a support mechanism for the good times and the bad times. Our role is one where, from a day-to-day basis, we're not sure when we enter a patient's room what we will encounter.
Wow.
And so each patient presents with a different finding. Each patient presents with a different demeanour. Some have just come out of surgery. Some are not wishing to see a chaplain. Others wish to see a chaplain, but not now. And others do not want to see a chaplain at all because, number one, of their fear of the unknown. They don't know, why has a chaplain come to see me? It must be really bad news if a chaplain has come to see me. And often people have that preconceived ideas. The initial part of my interaction with a patient or a relative is often one of trying to make them feel comfortable in my presence, to let them know that I'm not there to give a Bible study, but I'm there to offer support when where's needed, and I'm also there to offer a listening ear if it's needed. Because often when people are sick, especially towards the end of their life, they often have to do a lot of checks and balances, and it can be very difficult with family.
A bit of an inventory of their lives
that's
and
right.
what's important.
That's right. And it can be difficult for them to do that with family members who, number one, may not want to talk to them about the process of dying.
Yeah, you're not dying, Mum. Fight it all the way. Yeah.
You know, and our job is there to say, okay, this is the reality of the situation. You know, what are the things that maybe you need to put in order? Who are the things that you need to who are the people that you need to speak with? Are there things that you need to get off your chest that maybe it's difficult? You know, often we have a role as a listening ear, but we also have a role as a mediator in many cases. Death and, you know, they say death and weddings are often times that brings out family dynamics in a very, very, very real way.
The best and the worst in people.
Right.
Yep.
That's right.
I'm trying to picture myself, Yvonne, in your shoes, as you said, you know, standing outside the room of a patient, just about to go in, not knowing what you're going to face. Is it, you know, are you going to get resistance? Are you going to get, you know, tears and a hug? Thank goodness you're here. That must be a little bit nerve-wracking some days to, you know, every day you go to work there to know that's what you're going to face.
I wouldn't say it's nerve-wracking. Like I said, going into each patient's room presents with a different scenario every time because people are different. There are no two patients that are the same. They may have the same diagnosis, but they're not the same people.
So you just have to stay continually open and ready and... Wow.
Absolutely. It's not just the patients, because many times I enter a patient's room and the patient's unconscious, but there are relatives there. And I can often find out a lot about the patients and the dynamics in which, the family dynamics in which they're coming from, just by the interaction maybe with a husband who's waiting for their wife to come out of surgery, maybe with the children who've just been told that their parent, you know, has been diagnosed with cancer. And there are others that maybe they haven't been told the diagnosis, and the doctors have discussed with us the bad news, and they said, please accompany me to the patient's bedside, so that when I deliver the news and I leave the room, I'm leaving you to comfort,
to be a sounding board.
Right.
That's
right.
Wow. Okay. Well, in this month's Signs of the Times, Yvonne, we have the June Signs of the Times. We have an article by one of our regular writers, Melissa Howell, entitled "Death is Not the End." And in that article, she explores a number of different incidents from her own life where she, and her children in particular, she really seems to see it through their eyes, having to confront death sort of for the first time. And yeah, she explores this idea of death and what meaning we make of it as humans, and how we cope with trying to make sense of it. I imagine some of those themes that she raises in the article must resonate with the experience you have as a hospital chaplain.
It is, because and the article was a very interesting article in this month's Signs of the Times, and one of the questions it raises, or the many questions it raises, is literally what happens after death. And this is some of the questions that we get faced with.
It's a pretty abstract question, isn't it, for most of our lives?
It is.
Until suddenly we're faced with, you know, our own imminent demise or someone close to us. Is that something you see in your work at the hospital, that this question does suddenly become quite urgent for some people?
It becomes quite urgent, and it becomes quite urgent not necessarily after the patient has died, but often when the patient is dying. Because often people begin to grieve a long time before the patient has actually passed away.
Sure.
And so those questions, they're able to audit well before the patient has actually passed away. In fact, that's probably in many cases a relief for some of the relatives when that does happen, because death is the relief of suffering for many of them. It's not just the loss of an individual, but it can be the release in many cases, of the trauma that they've had to endure while they have watched their patient or watched their
loved one.
staff or their loved one pass away.
Boy, and that's a mixed emotion, isn't it? Because here's someone who you've been close to possibly for a very long time, who you've sort of urged, come on, we can make it through this, you can fight it through, and then in the end you have to let them go. And then you feel this sense of relief, and it sort of seems like a betrayal for some people, to feel that relief. What relief, as in I'm happy that they're gone, but I'm sad that they're gone. It's a mixed bag of emotions, isn't it?
It is a mixed bag. For the Christian, there is a hope in death. But remember, all Christians don't necessarily have relatives that they know are in the hands of God. We still don't even know that that's a God decision. That's not our decision.
Yeah.
We don't know how God moves on the human heart, even at the point of death. But we do know that He can, and He has. And so it's not that we offer false hope to anybody, but the Bible makes it very clear that there is eternal life has been offered to everybody, or will be offered to everybody. And the choice is not just a personal choice. I'll give you an example. When the other day I went to visit a patient on the ward, and the friend was in the room, but the friend was so close they were as if they were a relative. And they said, "Oh, the chaplain's here to see you, and so I'm going to leave you for a while." So number one, they recognized that this person who was a person of faith needed to talk, and they weren't able to fill that gap for that moment. And so as immediately the woman left the room, I was left with the patient, and the patient began to cry. They began to cry because their thought of them having the faith and knowing what faith meant to them, and knowing that death was not the end for them, they were more concerned with what happens to all my family that don't know Christ. What happens to them, and their angst, their anxiety, their frustration was, what am I going to do with all these people who are going to mourn for me, but do not have the hope that I have?
Wow.
And we sat there and audited that for a little while. And she was left with that comforting thought that eternal life's offered to everybody. Everybody will have the choice. Everybody will have the opportunity, but not everybody will accept.
Which is free will.
Which is free will, but not. Once again, it may not be something that she would see in her lifetime, but that doesn't mean to say that God is still not working on the human heart. So the fact that she wanted to see her relatives come to faith while she was alive, that reality may not be the case. But you never know. I said, even through death, people can come to faith. And God speaks to the human heart in so many ways that we know not of, and we know not how, but we just have to believe that He can. And He does.
Yeah. I think it was the Apostle Paul who wrote in the New Testament, talking about death and things. He said that we Christians do not mourn like those who have no hope.
That's right.
And I think you used the phrase before, that Christians have this hope when it comes to death. Can you outline for us what exactly you mean by that? And of course, different Christians see it differently, but
yes,
what do you read in the Bible that sort of helps you understand what the Apostle Paul might have meant in saying that?
For the Christian, death is like a sleep. We believe that when you die, that your body returns to the ground or to the dust to dust, ashes to ashes, but your breath, who you are, now remains in the hands of God. It's not a physical breath in terms of a physical, most people say, oh, the poor soul died. Well, it wasn't the soul that died. The person is a living soul while they're alive, and when they're dead, they're a dead soul. And in that, the Bible makes it very clear about what actually happens to a person's body, and the breath that was given has just literally, so-called, been returned to God.
Okay, so I guess we hear the phrase at funerals, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That is that a biblical quote?
It's a biblical quote.
Oh, there you
yes.
go.
Yeah.
And so far as death being a sleep is concerned, I mean, a number of our listeners, may have been brought up Christian, may have, gone to Sunday school very regularly and never heard this idea that death is asleep, and they may be very confused right now. So where in the Bible does it say that death is asleep?
So, in Ecclesiastes 12, it tells us that the dust returns to the ground from which it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. There are many other cases in terms of when we compare Genesis and we compare Daniel and we compare of all of these texts, they speak very clearly about how Jesus reacted to the whole idea of death and what it meant when he was around.
Well, I mean, that verse from Ecclesiastes you read us didn't use the word sleep. In fact, it said the spirit goes up to God. And I guess a lot of people say that when someone dies, that they have some part of them that is a spirit that goes up to God, and, mummy's in heaven, they say. And they hope she's not somewhere else, I guess. But are there places in the Bible where the word sleep is specifically used?
When Jesus literally said to his disciples that he's going to see Lazarus who was asleep. And the disciples took that as a literal sleep. Well, obviously he's going to get better then. But then Jesus says to them very plainly, let me help you understand. Lazarus is actually dead.
Okay, so Jesus himself, who you'd say would have to be an authority when it comes to these matters of the soul and spirit and afterlife, spoke of death as asleep. He actually did use that word.
That's right.
Okay, all right. I'm also thinking of the prophet Daniel. I think right towards the end of the book of Daniel, an angel comes to him and he says, Daniel, go in peace. You will sleep with your ancestors, and then sort of hints at a resurrection at the end of time. Is that picture of a resurrection also consistent with what we see elsewhere in the Bible?
So not just the picture of the resurrection, but who will do the resurrecting.
Okay.
And Jesus himself says that he will come again. And in that coming again, he's coming for all those who have died in faith, and then he will come for those who are living at the time in faith. And that makes it that's made very clear through the book of Revelation as well.
Okay. And I guess what was it, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 or something?
Yes,
there's a really clear text in there that talks about what the trumpet of God
and the dead in Christ shall rise.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, the dead in Christ shall rise, and we who are alive will be caught up together to meet them. So if the resurrection is real, and the Bible talks about the resurrection in a lot of different places, the resurrection of the dead, it sort of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go straight to heaven when you die and then be zapped back down to your body at the time of resurrection to be raised all over. It's while
that's the theology that we understand, and that's the theology that we hope in. But when someone's lost their loved one, that is not always the time to give them that study on the state of the dead. Because they're hurting right now.
Sure.
If you've ever lost anybody that's been very close to you, be it a person or an animal, then or somebody who you've cared for or who you've loved very much, it can be very difficult to understand the whys of what's happened,
or the mechanics of exactly what has happened. Yeah, sure.
And in that, so often people do find comfort in the fact that, yes, my loved one is looking down on me from heaven, and it gives them some kind of solace. Now, while that may not be the truth that we believe, at that point, I don't dispel, as a chaplain, I don't dispel that.
Sure. It's not the time or the place or your role necessarily.
That's right.
Sure.
And it's certainly, I don't have the right to do that, especially because people come from different faiths, especially in a hospital setting, where their culture and beliefs will often dictate how and what they believe, especially with what happens after death.
So how do you deal with that then? If you, I've been over to the hospital there. I've seen people people wearing Sikh turbans.
Yes.
I've seen women wearing Muslim hijabs. Christians of all persuasions are going through there. So when it does come to this time of trying to deal with the thought of dying with death, and you are there talking to these people, they have beliefs that are quite different from yours. How do you deal with that situation? Because I think this is helpful for our listeners too, because a lot of us will have friends who have close family who have died or who are dying, and want to know, well, I see death and dying quite differently to this person. How can I still be a comfort to them without sort of betraying what I truly believe about it?
Well, first of all, I think you have to see people as people, not based on their faith. When you see people as people, you recognize that death is a loss to anybody.
Sure.
No matter what religion you're from or what background you're from or what culture you're from, the loss of a loved one is the loss of a loved one.
And it hurts.
And it hurts. And it hurts. You know, when a mother loses their child, it doesn't matter whether they're a Muslim, a Christian, a Sikh, a Buddhist. It makes no difference. You've lost a child, and that loss is a very real sense. And once you can connect with the person on that level, then you've connected with the person. How they play out the funeral details and the celebration of the person's life is based on their culture and based on their religion. But loss is loss. And I think when I enter a room, I don't think, oh, I'm entering the room of a Buddhist, or oh, I'm entering the room of a Sikh. What I'm entering is I'm entering a person's room, a person who is sick, who has come to hospital for healing, or who has come to hospital to receive the care that's necessary for their long-term prognosis. You know, my thing is that to each room that I enter, I'm going to bring the gospel. But the gospel is not...
How do you mean that? Do you mean you're going to preach an evangelical sermon or something?
Absolutely not. Sometimes people are not in that position to, number one, receive an audible word or even a written word. But my presence, when I say bring the gospel, I mean bringing the gospel in ways that are very meaningful to a person, that offer comfort to that person, offer solace and relevance at the time when they need it most, and often when they have more questions than answers. Bringing the gospel is bringing Jesus into the room without even having to say the word, without even having to bring in my audible, or how can I say, my faith directly into confrontation with another person, but to help them to understand this is who I'm representing, but I'm here for you.
And I guess if you're representing Jesus, that requires you to behave in a way that Jesus would. And we know from reading the New Testament that he responded to particularly weak and hurting and broken people with incredible compassion.
He did, and he respected who they were. He met them where they were at. And then out of that, they then became a follower, not just at the point in say, you know, this is the way to go. Yes, he understands, but he befriended people first. And I think my role as a chaplain is about meeting people where they're at, in their sickness, in their low times, in their joys. It's about celebrating with people. It's about grieving with people. It's about mourning with people. And it's also about crying with people who are at that time where they'll need that courage, they'll need that strength, they'll need that support mechanism, or they might not need a single word, but they just might need a presence. I remember walking past a room one day, and it wasn't one of the rooms that I had to visit. It wasn't on my list of people to visit for that particular day, but I felt the Spirit say, you need to go back. You need to go back at that time. And I saw an elderly man with his hand hanging over the side of the bed. And I went to him, and he wasn't able to speak at that time. But I saw him holding his hand out, and so I held his hand. And at that moment, he died.
Wow.
And sometimes when you listen to the Spirit tells you to be in places where you don't know why, you don't understand the reason for your presence there. But he's saying, you know, Jesus is saying, you are my feet, you are my hands, you are my representative, so therefore please be where I asked you to be.
Wow, that really reminds me of something I think Mother Teresa said, that, you know, no one should have to die alone. You know, it's important to have someone with you there. Yes, something terrible is happening, but you don't have to do it alone. Wow. So how do you, as a person, deal with, I mean, this must be a very emotional thing to deal with this day after day. Do you have to sort of take stock of yourself spiritually? How do you strengthen yourself spiritually and emotionally to go out and deal with that with warmth and compassion, you know, day after day?
I mean, I'm not alone in this. This whole hospital is full of caring individuals who day after day have to return to the workplace or the scene where they've had to deal with some form of trauma over either a short period or a long period of time. So I'm not alone in that sort of sense. But dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, yes, I have to take personal stock of who I am, of what I believe in, and I do that daily by just reading the Word. And I have a good support mechanism around me. The team in which I belong are a very supportive team. They are a very cohesive and an alert team to recognizing certain signs.
That you might be heading towards burnout or finding life a bit tricky.
And we all look out for one another. And I think from that point of view, that support mechanism makes every single day not only a real one, but it makes one where you can go in knowing that you can also come away having dealt the best with each situation that you possibly can.
I mean, the hospital keeps funding chaplains to do this, so I imagine you must, or the hospital must, find that this is producing some sort of positive result. Do you find people are calmer, clearer, happier, more content after you've spoken to them?
In some cases.
I know it's hard to judge.
It's very hard to judge once you've left the room how patients will have received your care. But usually during the interaction, you can get a good sense of if you're making a difference or not. And often the difference is not a measurable difference in saying, that was a person well-healed spiritually, that was a person well-healed socially. It may mean that they've had one step closer to understanding where they are. It may mean that they're taking one step closer to being able to audit their own life.
So, Yvonne, if so often it's difficult to find measurable results in what you do, why do you keep doing it? What do you get out of it?
Because this is the purpose. This is the purpose. That our potential is not really to tick all the boxes so that we have visited all these people but without any results. But there are feedbacks. People do give feedback. But even though we're not doing this so that we get the feedback, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. Because people have expressed a need. Even, often we'll go into a room and people say, no, thank you, no chaplain, because they obviously think, you're here for a spiritual purpose and to deliver some Bible message, and they're not really at that stage, or it's not the right or appropriate time. And so they turn you away. But often our first interaction with patients is an introductory one. And over time, some of the lasting and more meaningful relationships that I've had within the hospital are ones that have said on the first meeting, no, thank you.
There you go.
But over time, because I've treated them as people and not just conditions or you are a label, then we've struck up a very good conversation. And often, like I said, sometimes I don't always meet the patient. Patients unconscious at the time that I've arrived in the room, and I will get to meet the relatives. And that relationship builds over time, and then questions come about faith. But it's about understanding the person, understanding the person's life, their interaction with the patient, and then helping them to audit the process that the patient's going through. So my role is many and varied.
And it sounds like it is really valuable. I mean, I know sometimes, human relationships generally are a little bit hard to pin down and categorize, but I can see your warmth and I can see your positivity and I can just imagine the word you used earlier in the interview was presence. I can imagine the impact of your presence there in those difficult times. So thank you so much for your presence here too on Signs of the Times Radio. Really appreciate it, and God bless you in what you're doing, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Kent.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.